Okay, this is part B of the lecture on migrant health. Go to the slide that says migrant crisis continued, and then it says lots of accidents. And unfortunately, you have photographs on this slide of body bags and of coffins. So, the crossing of the Mediterranean is very, very dangerous in these small boats, these boats that aren't even seaworthy. And there are lots and lots of accidents. In 2013, a boat sank, killing more than 300 refugees. After that accident, the Italian government adopted a policy of intercepting refugee boats and either guiding those refugee boats into an Italian port or if the boat is not seaworthy, then transferring the migrants off of the non-seaworthy boat and onto an Italian Coast Guard boat. And then, again, taking them to an Italian port city. Oh, the smugglers love that. They even reduced their price for the smuggling, and they could advertise that the trip across the Mediterranean, the voyage across the Mediterranean would be safe because the Italian Coast Guard would come out and get you and escort you into Italy. Okay? But the intervention of the Italian Coast Guard made a significant improvement in the crossings for migrants, but it didn't fix everything. 2 years later, in 2015, another boat sank, killing 700 refugees. Many of them were locked below deck. Okay, and the accidents continue. Next slide. In the 3 years between 2014 and 2016, so 2014, 15, and 16, more than 500,000 migrants arrived in Italy. And during those 3 years, 4,400 died in the crossing between Libya and Italy. Only in that one route, 4,400. More died on the other routes. We don't even know how many people died because the smugglers don't tell us which boats sink and which boats make it. All right, the next slide, please. Okay, migrant health issues in Italy. There's a common misperception in Italy that the migrants are arriving with infectious diseases for which the local population in Italy has no immunity, or very little immunity. And that is actually a misperception. That is actually not true. While some migrants do arrive in Italy with communicable diseases, most of those diseases already exist among the Italian population. So, in other words, the migrants are not bringing in new diseases to Italy. However, migrants are arriving, particularly migrants from sub-Saharan African countries, are arriving with higher than average rates of disease. Next slide, please. Okay. When migrants arrive at a port city in Italy, they are supposed to undergo a health inspection, either by a government health team or by health teams provided by non-government organizations like the Italian Red Cross, Doctors Without Borders, one of those types of charitable organizations. Next slide. Here is a flyer that the World Health Organization puts out to migrants. It's in English. I don't know how many native languages it's in, but you can see it's kind of an overview of the types of health concerns that migrants have when they arrive in Europe. All right. So some of the communicable diseases that the Europeans are particularly concerned about, including Italy, is HIV/AIDS. Okay, as you already know, HIV/AIDS is transmitted through the exchange of bodily fluids, most typically through sexual contact or through use of infected needles. So rates of HIV and AIDS are low among migrants from the Mideast and North Africa, but they are high among migrants from sub-Saharan African nations. And you see a map here in Africa, you know, and the red are countries where there is a prevalence of HIV/AIDS, and the black is where HIV/AIDS rates are really, really high. Approximately 40% of HIV patients throughout Europe, not just in Italy, but throughout Europe, are migrants. So that's a public health concern that European countries have to face right now. Okay, next slide. Malaria. Malaria is transmitted primarily through mosquitoes. Currently, there is no approved vaccine, although clinical trials are underway. 90% of the cases of malaria in the world occur in sub-Saharan African nations. So migrants, a significant number of migrants from sub-Saharan Africa arrive in Europe, arrive in Italy or another European country infected with malaria, sick with malaria. Okay, next slide. Dehydration and food poisoning. Virtually all of the migrants arrive dehydrated. Most of them have had this 1,000+ mile overland trek in open trucks. And then they've had the crossing on the sea without much water to drink. You know, they take a little bottle of water with them, but that's all they have. If they cross in the summer, it's very, very hot. Most of them come with insufficient nutrition, particularly if they've been on the 1,000-mile trek from wherever to a port city where they can get to Italy from. And many of them try to bring food with them, but of course there's no safe storage for food during this trek. And so they eat what they have, but there are also high rates of food poisoning. Next slide. Pregnancy and childbirth is also an issue for migrants. While the quote-unquote typical migrant is a young male, somewhere between the ages of, say, 18 and 22 years, we do have a lot of young families trying to migrate as well. And when the woman is pregnant, remember, they've traveled overland for thousands of miles. That's taken them usually months, because they stop along the way, they get detained here, they get to pay off government officials, bribe government officials to let them cross borders. It's not like getting in your Chevy, and driving across country. Okay, and they don't have access to good forms of birth control in their countries of origin. And so we have a significant number of women arrive pregnant or having just given birth. And remember that the most accurate indicator of a positive pregnancy outcome for both mother and baby is prenatal care. And these women are not getting prenatal care. And moreover, they are arriving with no medical history. Their medical charts don't even exist in their home countries. And if they did exist, they wouldn't be in possession of the migrant when they got off the boat in Italy. All right. But one of the biggest health problems that migrants are facing are mental health challenges, particularly post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD, anxiety, and depression. And this is completely understandable. They have fled very dangerous situations. They've fled economies where they lived in poverty. Some of them have been subjected to torture. They've seen their loved ones murdered in front of their eyes. They are separated from the loved ones who are still alive. And they've endured a very frightening overland trek, usually, and sea voyage with a high rate of accidental deaths. And many of them don't speak Italian. Most of them don't speak Italian. So it's one thing to diagnose a woman who's pregnant and she doesn't speak Italian. It's another thing to try and diagnose someone with mental health issues who doesn't speak Italian. Next slide. So we're moving now to the kind of care that migrants get when they arrive in Italy. So the National Health Service will provide some of these migrants with health care. If you asked to be an asylum seeker and you were granted asylum seeker status, which is no easy accomplishment to be granted an asylum seeker status, Then you're called, if you're granted that status, then you're officially called a refugee. That is a legal status in Italy. A refugee is a legal status in Italy, and it guarantees you the right to all the same services from the National Health Service, the SSN, that you would have if you were an Italian citizen. All right? But most people don't land as migrants in Italy and get refugee status. They just don't. So then you have what the Italian government calls the irregular migrants. Those are the undocumented immigrants, sometimes called illegal immigrants, sometimes called illegal migrants. They are entitled to emergency care, including childbirth. Next slide. So in addition to the government of Italy, we have non-government organizations also providing medical services to migrants. There is the Italian Council for Refugees. It offers medical care as well as other services to migrants. There is the Italian Red Cross, and there is Doctors Without Borders. All of them are NGOs, non-government organizations. Okay, so I'm going to spend a little time talking about Doctors Without Borders because it's a very good example. In Europe, they call it the MSF because it was founded in France, and the official name of this organization is Médecins, which means doctors, Médecins Sans Frontières, medical doctors without boundaries or without borders. Okay, as I mentioned, it was originally founded in France. It now offers services around the world in some very dicey places in the midst of wars. There are, Doctors Without Borders sites, for example, in the war zones in Syria. It was originally founded to provide healthcare in developing countries where healthcare facilities didn't exist, or in countries that were racked with political violence. In 1999, Doctors Without Borders won the Nobel Prize for Peace. Next slide, please. So, Doctors Without Borders is headquartered, the Italian division is headquartered in Rome, and they have a large program that provides health services to arriving migrants, and they also have ships that they send out into the Mediterranean to pick up migrants and to escort migrants to Italian ports. So they're working hand in hand with the Italian Coast Guard. And there's a short video there, a short documentary film about rescues at sea by Doctors Without Borders that you should view. All right, next slide. Okay. Here you have a map of Italy that shows you where Doctors Without Borders has services for incoming migrants. They have refugee centers and healthcare clinics on the southern tip of Sicily, on the southern sea boundary of Sicily at Ragusa, Pozzallo, and Augusta. And they have clinics on the mainland, one in Rome, and also up on the very northeast border of Italy, Gorizia, because you have migrants coming, most migrants are coming by sea, but you have thousands of migrants coming over land and entering Italy at Gorizia. It's near Trieste. Okay. In 2015, Doctors Without Borders treated more than 3,000 migrants in Sicily alone, and many of them had post-traumatic stress syndrome. All right, that is it for Part B of the lecture on migrant healthcare. Study hard and have a great day. Go sit in the piazza.